Well, you know, I kind of always wish that people would stop shaking hands because I sometimes I would be in meetings and I'd have to shake everyone's hand. People's hands would feel sweaty and then I would have to go wash my hands. You know?
Yeah.
Do anything.
Yeah.
That's the results when he's double.
Is that right?
Oh, no, I thought we were taking.
Yeah, they were kind of still figuring out their lives. Yeah, we have. It's a body count. And then finally, yeah, it was really. And so we're down. That's why we were doing. Yeah. Yeah, it's good for both.
Anyone try to pack parking? Commercial place.
Yeah.
Did you get it?
No,
You can pull up to them. Or they won't.
No, they won't. Have to, there's nobody.
I honked and everything.
You have to press the button. There's a thing, like an intercom.
So since when does this all start?
I don't know. And then the intercom connects with over there,
Oh.
and then they can remotely open. Yeah. Very, very.
I tried to. So.
Oh, yeah.
It's good. Yeah. I asked for instruction. So the good news is they exist.
Yeah. Me?
Yeah.
So the problem, the main problem is water. Oh, it's up short. Sorry about this. You got it.
Let me know.
Speaking of just numbers. I mean, we're not that much, but.
20.
Having any idea this week.
Sweet.
Yeah.
It's off.
Everybody got their microphone pushed.
So, here. Everything takes a little time down, so, but it should be on the boards. I had it showing 3 minutes of this. Ready? All right, so we'll call the meeting to order. This is the Brewery District Commission. And today is August 5th. It's our regular meeting. The next monthly business meeting is at noon on Thursday, August 19th. Same room. The next commission meeting after that will be at 4 o'clock on Thursday, September 2nd, also in this room. Can you please state your name? And be clear, and I'll swear you in.
On the floor back, it's this historic preservation officer.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, first thing on the agenda is minutes from the last meeting.
Introduction.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Let me introduce the commission president. I just said my first time officially being sitting in this chair, so I'm showing my mistakes. So I've been. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Taviani Kurani, first day today, really excited.
Welcome to the commission. Thank you.
William Ugas.
Cynthia Hunt.
Daniel Bauer.
Renovation.
Else, how you'd like me to introduce? Okay, great. All right, we're going to start with the minutes from the last meeting. You guys had a chance to look at them? Did they be on it? Okay, are there any questions? I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay. Passed. Minutes are passed. Thank you very much. And do we have speakers today, time?
No public forum.
Okay. So no speaker slips per se.
Well, that will be for each.
All right, it says give directions regarding requirements of those wishing to speak.
Yes, well, we can go over here. I don't think anyone who's going to speak is here.
Okay. Not sure if we have any additional people who wish to speak, but of those who wish to, the speaker slips need to be filled out stating your name, address, affiliation, and the agenda item number that you wish to speak to. This is not true for applicants. This is just true for the general public who wishes to speak. Speakers will address the chair. I'm the acting chair for today, and you're limited to 3 minutes, and it will be called in the order of our receipt. So speaker slips can be obtained
On the
back at the corner if anybody needs it. Great. No public forum today?
No.
Okay. Then I guess we'll look at the agenda.
Approval of staff approval?
Right. So have people looked at the commissioners looked at the staff approval items? Okay. Any comments or questions? Entertain a motion to approve the staff approve applications.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Leave that one aside.
Pardon?
Leave that one.
Matt. Okay. So we move on to the new applications because the continued application is not being covered today. Okay, item BD 21 08 004 524 528 Meyer Place. Will be parties who are interested in speaking to this agenda item, please come forward. How are you today?
Okay,
Can you state your name, address, affiliation?
I'm Dan Klein, I'm the architect, working for David Bischoff.
And do you swear to, can you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Have a seat. So we'll start with the staff report on this item.
So this is about facade renovations for the south end of the west elevation. This is phase 2. So various work going on here, including a third entrance tower at the south end of the facade. Basic things like painting and repairing broken tiles and installing new aluminum door frames. On the south elevation to repairing broken tiles and paint, infill certain openings, and then landscaping component also. So an application was submitted and approved in 2014 as a west facade renovation to be completed in 2 phases. Phase 1 has been constructed, and this project is to complete phase 2 to match phase 1. This proposal also includes painting west and south elevations and an infill of some window openings and new storefronts on the south elevation. The landscape plan for the south end facade, which is the west elevation, mirrors the landscape plan for the north. If bricking in of openings is approved on the south elevation, based on lack of visibility on any public right of way, infill bricks should match the color of the surrounding glazed brick and be set in 1 to 2 inches from the base of the wall. So recommend approval of the application with those caveat, basically, that a brick in openings on the south elevation be match the glazed brick and be set in 1 to 2 inches from the base of the wall.
Thank you. Anything you would like to share with us?
I have a question on the infill, basically saying that you wanted the infill in a different plane. Okay,
That's my opinion.
Typically, we want the opening to read as an opening
separate, okay,
rather than try to flush it.
okay. Okay, no, we have no problems with that.
Other questions?
Not really. I mean, this project is pretty much a mirror image of what we did 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Just a continuation. But
Hey, do the commissioners have anything they would like to ask or bring up as part of the conversation? I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve as submitted with the notes by the professional staff.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So number 2, 723 South Front Street.
Right.
Is like to have a be continued.
It's continued until our next meeting.
Yes.
Right? Thank you very much.
Do we have to vote on that?
Okay. I'll entertain a motion. Thank you, Bill.
I move to continue item number 2.
I'll second that. Thank you, Matt. All in favor? Opposed? Same sign. Moving on to BD 21-08-004, 524 528 Meyer Place. Anyone in the room for that application? Should you join us? Can you please, while standing,
Yeah,
state your name, your affiliation, and address, and your connection to the agenda?
yeah, Oliver Holtzberry, Day Night Sign Company. Our address is 1640 Harmon Avenue.
You are the vendor of the sign.
Yes, yes,
Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
yes, I do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Be seated.
So this is for a new wall sign. They would be removing the 2 existing wall signs that were approved in July of 2020. And then install a new wall sign, individual logo and letters to be 2 inches deep, HDU painted white. Letters and logo to be set off from the wall and backlit. And also would be install a cover on the rear of the 8-inch the CMU parapet wall to cover the wiring. Based on commissioner comments at the July 22nd business meeting, the size of the previously approved, proposed sign was 120 square feet. Since the business meeting, that was reduced to 24 square feet. Right. which meets the guidelines. So it's not, a proposed sign is not compatible with short sign guidelines, and, recommend approval. I just wanted to get a comment on, the, from your input on, the holes that would be made in the wall. Is that okay here? Because it's a parapet wall, isn't that right?
Correct.
And so the holes would go all the way through. Not necessarily, I'm thinking through the border because they might need to be too big. Did they go through the border?
But they'll go all the way through, and the wires and power supplies will be on the back, and we're building like a little metal raceway frame to hide all the wires.
My question, I guess, is will it damage the CMU so that if it's taken down, there will be holes in that? And like the whole
It won't really damage it. If it was ever taken down, there would be holes in it. But yeah, just like any of the other walls of the signs there, but yeah.
So are you feeling, trying to fill the holes in the signs that are being taken out?
Yes, that's.
I don't know how you would attach a sign without putting holes in.
Yeah.
What's that? There's, oh, and the other signs? Yeah, we were gonna fill them with silicone, yeah. Correct.
So do we want to amend it?
I guess to maybe make clear that when those are
Right, or let's say like that to match the
color.
color.
Anything you would like to question about the staff report, or anything you'd like to bring up?
Nope, we got the feeling in the business meeting that, our original proposal was too big and, wasn't over 25 square feet, wasn't gonna be allowed. So we just went ahead and made it 25 square feet and we're
We
good.
appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
Purposes of this.
Yeah. Mhm.
Do the commissioners have questions for the applicant?
It seems to conform to the other situations on the building.
We appreciate that's a simple thing. Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve this application, but that the old holes from the old sides are filled with silicone and that actually existing material.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? It's passed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, BD 21 08 5 has been moved to staff approval, so no activity on that. BD 21 08 6 831 833 South Front Street. Will the applicant please come forward? Will you please state your name, your address, your relationship to the project, and profession?
Bronte Clifford, 831, 833 South Front Street, and I'm the owner of the building.
Great. Can you raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. You may be seated. Staff report?
So this is requesting approval to remove exterior paint from the exterior brick walls, repair existing brick planting bed along the front of the building, and remove existing plant weeds, and so forth. General landscape there. So paint removal with dry ice supposed to be done prior to review and approval. A 311 report was received by code enforcement and the code officer contacted the property owner. In a discussion with the property owner, staff noted that many brick buildings in Brewery Village and the Brewery District were sandblasted back in the 1960s and 70s before people understood that it removes the outer skin, leaving the brick exposed to the elements as a second deterioration. With some paint removed, we can see that this building may have been sandblasted and has also been pointed with mortar that is too hard to destroy brick. The National Park Service lists use of dry ice, which is the method being used under abrasive methods, stating ice particles or pelletized dry ice are another medium used as abrasive cleaner. This is also too abrasive to be used on most destroyed masonry, but it may be have practical applications for mass systems. Paint removal with a chemical cleaner or chemical remover was approved for this building back in 1994. It appears that that work was not completed and that the house was repainted at some point without approval. It was also noted that the previous owner has also installed banner signs without approval. Recommend repainting of the exterior brick walls based on the damage of the brick, with paint colors to be submitted to HPO staff for approval. Recommend removal of the two existing banners. That also does not need graphics code to have banners. And also wanted to say, when we were out at the site visit yesterday, this was, I kind of looked at some other areas where the paint was just chipping. I don't know if anybody's looked. I didn't look for them. And so I'm wondering if maybe the dry ice was kind of doing some damage, because I didn't see quite as much damage on just the chipped areas. So now I'm kind of wondering if it might be appropriate to do some test removal of areas, you know, with a chemical method, if the property owner wants to do that.
But I'm recommending,
I know this was, I wrote this for
okay. So you're thinking there are options for the property?
I think there might be options now, and I was wondering if maybe anybody else had gone out to look at it.
I can go look at it, but I haven't. Yeah, that is definitely a single mistake.
Exactly.
Picture.
I was looking on the other side,
But you're looking on the north side.
Yeah.
And you think it's one layer of paint?
No,
Oh, it's multiple layers.
I looked at it again closely and it looks like there's multiple layers.
Well, it did used to be white, long time ago,
Mm-hmm.
when it was approved in 1994.
Right.
So I don't know who painted gray.
It wasn't me.
Yeah, I think it's been that way for quite some.
We appreciate you coming in today. Is there something you'd like to offer as part of the conversation first? Come back to Connie and never state the options, but.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm very sorry that I did this, and I just bought the building. I'm new to the area, and I want to be respectful of the commission and requirements, and I appreciate you guys letting me know what those are. I do think that there are some things that was done by the previous owner that, you know, if I'm responsible for, I accept that too. I just want to do what's right.
We appreciate that, and I hope you understand the comments from the commission, because they help sustain your building and not to let it deteriorate in a way that's more rapid than it would be otherwise.
Yes.
Okay. You want to state what you think the options are?
Well, I mean, it's kind of difficult. That's why I would like maybe Bill or someone else to go, so take a look at it. If the applicant.
Yeah, what's your timeline?
I don't have a timeline.
So would you like to have somebody come out and look and give you sort of very educated advice?
Yes, please. Yes.
And then
I'd be
they-
glad to try.
Yeah, okay. Because then the only thing is that on this side, it obviously was sandblasted
Yeah.
or damaged in some way. So does it make sense to uncover the paint on one wall, but not the other wall? Maybe it's on the facade, but, you know.
So we would continue for today, and it's pending, you know, commission visit and conversation, and then do you think it could go to staff rules, or would Ms. Clifford have to come back?
I think if we go to staff approval with that.
I would think so.
That's all right. Is everybody okay with that?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Just so I'm clear, I could repaint it if there are no options. I mean, I have to repaint it if there are no options.
We think that's the best thing. for
Okay, and I have to get approval of the color. Okay, all right, thank you.
Connie's incredibly helpful, already come and ask questions.
So Connie can help coordinate the time of day that we can meet.
Okay,
Did you want to talk about just the general landscaping though? That's fairly straightforward, as I said.
So split it into a couple motions, maybe.
Yeah,
Have a motion for the landscaping and have a motion for those. Great. Okay,
Landscape version completely recyclable.
I think so.
yeah, just to make that clear, whoever put the signs up, those banners, they're actually against the graphics code also. They're basically an illegal sign, so those will have to come down.
Okay.
And I think you already have house numbers on, otherwise, are there something, there's some fixed to the wall besides that?
This is a residence now?
no.
Okay.
It's a business.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yes.
could apply for a different type of sign if you want to do that at some time.
Okay,
The banners look.
but I can leave the hardware that's attached to the building.
We'll talk about that because when you remove hardware too, also you have to be careful of damage.
Right.
You want to leave the hardware for the signs?
I would like to put up other signs, so it's just, I need to remove the banners.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You may be able to keep the top one or something, but you wouldn't be allowed a sign that large. That would be against the guidelines.
Okay,
So you might leave them at this time and then we'll figure out, we can talk about what your options are for signage.
So continue the sign or just remove it at this stage?
I think they should be removed just because they're.
So are we asking to remove the stanchions as well? That's what I think.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, so two motions. I'll entertain a motion on the brick and the paint. first.
Move to continue the consideration of brick paintings until the commissioner can visit the site, and recommend something specific.
With the staff member. After which time?
After which time the applicant can seek to pursue the project with staff.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. I'm seeing everybody speak, so I know it's all on. So that's okay. I'll entertain a motion for the second topic, which is the beds, the landscaping, and the signage.
So the gravel mulch is going to remain, is that what we're approving?
Repair.
It's-
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Oh,
repair
repair
of
that one.
Replace, well, repair.
repair. Mhm.
And just plant grass and tree lawns.
Well, the brick they use on that temporary end looks like it's wall brick, which is not hard enough for all the moisture that planters take. You really need a paver brick for that. So that's probably why it's deteriorating.
So when you are out there, you could help proceed to that and the other paper brick on site to maybe help finish the job. That would be awesome. Thank you very much, sir. So, any other questions? Still waiting on a motion. Okay.
So I'll take a shot.
Okay.
So make a motion to hold off on repairing the wall until there's a commission member can go out and make a recommendation. And to remove the banners and leave the stanchions until a later date.
With the recommendation on the right kind of brick to repair the wall and things specific.
And then that could be stacked.
And that could be stackable as well. Okay.
Second.
Any discussion or question? All in favor?
Aye.
One opposed. Is everyone said? So Connie, you cool with that? Motion passed.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Okay, good.
Thank you.
I will be in touch.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for caring. Thanks for buying in the neighborhood. Thrilled to have you. Right-minded. Sorry, that's an intro. On item BD 21-08-007, the applicants please join us at the table.
They're not here yet.
Yeah, we're way ahead. I suspect.
You have other people come? You have other people?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we'll move ahead and come back to that.
And that's the last one we have.
No, there's one more.
Oh.
21-08-008. Did we talk about that?
That's them and they're not moving, they're,
Oh, I thought that was so. We have two, right?
yes.
7 and 8. So 9 approved is checked.
action on it, so.
We're running family through.
Four twenty-seven, we're gonna take a little break.
Yeah, like.
Here.
You can.
I could probably do my exercise right now.
Is everybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay. I usually just go back in.
Yeah, it's not good. Next time.
People who just came in, we're just taking a break, waiting for applicants, because we're looking for schedule.
They were downstairs in the lobby.
Okay.
So we're running 10 minutes ahead.
Yes. I mean, it's longer now. I mean,
Well, that's my speakers on the front.
Excuse me, you guys are yeah, you guys start actually. Go on, go on.
into we get the French.
So,
Emails in your feet meter. Okay.
so.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think
I didn't know if you were scared. Well, now I can see it.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
Before I forget, John,
We have a second.
and
Now, been writing jokes out. So you
They-
can say it beyond that.
yes, if you make sure you're on. You know, I'm used to yours. Okay, you're on.
Well, it's not as an applicant. No, yeah.
the regulations, you know.
No, you don't. Well. Yeah.
So, usually, yeah. Sometimes they walk. Yeah. That's after the day for a pet. Come back. Security. Let me in.
Doesn't mean on site. Six is Bradley Clifford, we already did one. Oh, I'm looking at the number. I'm looking at the number.
Agenda item number.
I just got it.
So 007.
They got their mics on.
Oh, sorry. You guys are 7.
Oh.
6. Well, you're chasing around.
Item BD, dash
Sorry.
21-48 dash 7 514 to 518 South High Street. Could you please come forward?
Yeah. Yeah. What? Oh, I thought you were
So we have to continue that.
514, 518, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm getting them mixed up.
Got it.
Tell me, see if I can.
Okay, can you please stand and state your name?
Jamie Oberschleich with Shift Capital Group. We are the owner. developer.
Mike Shannon, attorney for the applicant. I do.
I do.
Staff report, please, Connie.
I'm not gonna read the entire, this existing site, because of this project is on the last one, basically just talks about the surrounding area of the site. So the proposal is demolition of existing building interior, previous building positions and surface parking lot, resolving the 1927 exterior shell, fronting South High and East Glenmore streets, and constructing a new 7-story mixed-use building with 5 stories added to above the existing 2-story building. New mixed-use development, 267 residential units, including 2 townhomes, fronting South Pole Street, and so forth. Prior to designation as a historic district, the Brewery District's plan identified the following issues: loss of character due to demolition and incompatible redevelopment, parking concerns that impact the Brewery District and River Village, and lack of project design review along High Street, given its relationship to the adjacent historic districts. The building site is located within the northern tier of the Brewery District, which is Livingston Avenue to East Sycamore Street, an area within the Brewery District that is appropriate for development of taller buildings along the High Street corridor. Staff supports development of reasonably higher buildings along South High Street, where currently occupied by surface parking lots or non-contributing 1 to 3-story buildings. As more development begins to take place on South High Street, the character and scale of existing historic buildings along South Pearl and South Wall. And discuss.
Right, today is a conceptual.
Correct.
Gentlemen, do you have any questions for Connie? Would you like to speak?
Yes, you want to go first?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thanks for waiting while I was late but early and not skipping over us. We're really excited to be here in front of you and not behind a Zoom meeting like we were in March. Since March, we've worked really hard to keep the same theme of building that we originally presented, yet maximize the building, make it the best building we could. We have taken into account some of the comments that were at the business meeting, and we're actively working on some alterations to address those. I'm gonna kind of leave it at that before it spins into conversation, because I know Mike wants to do some introductions, but I'm gonna let Brad do that. So.
Thank you. Chairperson Hunt, members of the commission, as he indicated, we tried to get some iterations done based on the business meeting comments, but couldn't get them done by Friday. So Brad can talk maybe a little bit generically about those. We don't have those renderings. From a zoning standpoint, to the extent this is a conceptual review, I just wanted to reiterate, basically the variances are the same as they would have been with the original concept back in March. Number 1 would be a height variance to allow the 79-foot in height. Also, to the extent the property is zoned C4, a very common variance is if you want to have residential uses on the ground floor of C4, that requires a use variance. The C4 category allows unlimited residential above the ground floor, but no residential on the ground floor. So that's the need for that variance. And depending on the mix of the residential units and the retail space, there will more than likely be a parking variance. And a technical variance is that we intend to provide a lot more than the code required bicycle parking. And that technically is required to be visible from the public right of way. And if you put it interior to your garage, that requires a variance too. So those are the zoning variances that myself and my associate Eric Zartman identified from the preliminary concept plan. With that, did you want Brad to come up and join you and go through the?
Let me, I'm sorry. How many feet height? What's the variance from?
I think all of the High Street corridors have a 35-foot height district, and we'd be requesting to go to 79 feet. The second one is ground floor residential in the C4. The third is required number of parking spaces.
What are we going to be short on
Well, for the residential, we're looking to meet it at 1-to-1, and when next we meet you, we will refine whether or not there's a restaurant and or some offices. So that will dictate the magnitude of the variance.
What your intention is residential 1-to-1.
That's our goal. That seems to be a standard that's been acceptable in recent developments in close proximity to this site.
We have negotiated with the owner of the 500 South Front Garage, and we're just waiting on the letter from them that we'll have at the final hearing. They're going to allow us to rent up to, I believe, 50 spaces per month across the street, yeah. So we will have that to help try to offset any parking shortfall on our
So
site.
we'll hear the story in more detail during the next meeting.
That's correct. And thanks for reminding me of the parking spaces. The BZA that ultimately would hear parking variances typically allows you to provide parking if it's within 500 feet of the subject site. So thanks for reminding me about that. And then Brad Parrish is an architect that's going to come up, and are you going to walk through anything here?
We can walk through it.
Oh. And then lastly, Randy Black is here to the extent you have any questions about the Brewery District guideline. Thank you.
Brad Parrish with Archall Architects, working on the project now. We've sort of picked up since the March meeting, sort of developed kind of a more structured parking, to get to the 1-to-1 for on-site. So it's like a 3-tier parking structure on the first couple levels. Things that we heard from the business meeting that we're actively working on, obviously material studies on the exterior. We heard your concerns of the hardy material specifically. So we are going through material studies and costing with the budget to make sure we can present a more suitable material for the scale of this building. I didn't hear that the brick was an issue, so I'd like to get your feedback. Do we need a larger brick or a different size brick on that so we can touch on that after I'm okay. All right, thank you. And then one of the other discussion points last time was potentially on the blinker. Yeah,
The Pearl side.
Pearl side would be stepping back the top floor a little bit. So we're doing some studies of the 7th level of if we can get some relief in that elevation to provide sort of a step back. So we will show those next time. I don't want to talk more until we are 100% sure on how it looks from a design standpoint, but this facade, yes.
Stepping just the top.
To the top floor and probably pulling the banding down a little bit on that. So it gives a reduced overall height when you're on Pearl, okay? Looking eastward. So we will have updated renders showing some of the utilities as well. I think that was also a concern about in the corner here. So the renders will accurately show that next time. So sorry we couldn't have more, but we are responding towards your the brown bag comments. And with that, I'll take your questions at this time, if you have any.
Along Pearl, what is the approximate setback currently as you show it?
I believe we're 23 feet from
23 feet.
base of townhouse, I
From the
believe.
starting point of the time.
Yes.
From the starting, yeah.
What is your, on High Street, what is your setback from the building facade to your upper floors there?
So we have on page 24,
Currently.
yeah, on our page 24, we're showing 7 feet. And then in the balcony areas, we have an additional 6 foot there. So, they're it sort of undulates across that western facade.
So there's French balconies, French balconies, or?
No, wait, you said on south, this elevation, looking east. Oh, can you go back, please? Yeah. High Street elevation. So the section that's shown on page 24 of the document, if you can get to that, starts to show all of the different setbacks from the building facade. So it's 7 to the main facade and then an additional 6 where there's recessed balconies. Okay.
The parking, just the
The
parking.
parking
structure.
structure. We were, can you go to the side? We were trying to give sort of more of a base with a bigger module on that than doing the smaller brick. So that's kind of why we were selecting that.
That's facing the neighbor's parking lot, highly visible. I understand the scale, you want to change the scale, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure if the lot could keep it right.
Yeah, it feels like there's supposed to be a building that's coming up against this in the future.
Right.
okay. So we'll study that in our material. Okay.
Something a little more dressy.
Yeah,
We, over at Ridge Street, which I'm sure Lewis and Connie are real familiar with, we went away from block there and used a shoal ice material with chamfered edges. Something, are you thinking something like that or? Not sure, you got to see it
We'll
first.
study it.
All right.
we'll study it.
Look at the right of way along High Street, site improvements.
Not really at this time. I mean, we're, again, we're trying to keep the facade as it is. There is a lot of step along the High Street elevation.
In the actual.
Right of way, no. I think that's gonna be geared towards what tenant we have at that first level, and will they have a sidewalk dining license out there, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think we may leave that towards the tenant to come and bring back to the commission.
I think as a commission, we promote outdoor dining, especially on the northern tier
Mhm.
High Street. I mean, I have a general comment about the overall height. I'm definitely in support of, before this was a controlled district, it was 60-foot height. And within that, if you step back, you can actually go a little higher,
Mhm.
certain things. So you're exceeding the original height requirement. I think maybe stepping back the upper floor or the upper two floors again would be helpful on both
Even on
facades.
front.
Yeah. This is a general.
Or taking up a floor, as we discussed.
And having retail on ground floor with no parking doesn't bother me in this section. We've allowed a number of facilities to occur, and I think we do like to see some crowdedness on the street in the evenings.
Mhm.
I agree with that. I think your parking strategies. Can you talk a little bit about your facade treatment and how you're gonna retain that historic facade?
So it would really, I mean, it will probably be supported from the exterior, in the right of way, and really sort of peeling back that the existing structure so that we can build the parking podium around that exterior skin. So it'll be a very skillful task to do so.
So we're not talking about replicating that, we're talking about.
Preserving it, yes.
I had a conversation with our contractor from Rich Street that I'm talking to potentially about this job, and their initial thought was, go in, take out what we can take out, create some holes, get structure in to hold it in place. Well, that was, from inside was one option they've talked about from the outside, but until we probably bring them on, we're not going to get a firm, this is the best way we can do it plan.
But the idea is to retain and not rebuild it.
There will be no knockdown and rebuild, so.
Yeah, I've done it with three-story building from the inside. It's an engineering nightmare, but you gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want more details on that? In their final submission? How they're gonna do it?
Well, I assume you have engineers on board.
We're gonna start getting engineers. on
Yeah, we
board.
have not brought in
yeah, we're not
MEP
there
and
yet.
structural
Maybe
this time.
Maybe they're from structural engineering members or Facade, telling us that it's possible.
Okay,
I think the concern is if you start and find a problem and a section collapses, we're not gonna be happy.
I don't think we'll be happy either, so.
We'll be really.
No, because then we'll have to
Fair.
rebuild that facade when we could rebuild something much more attractive, so.
Just like to say, in my opinion, some horse trading could be done about the stepping back. So if you knock off 2 stories on the alley side to put a German, which to me, that's the greatest gesture. I think I can stomach more of the 7 stories on High Street.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's sick, probably not. It's okay, we know you'll think.
So you'll have
Think about it.
more details about use of facade materials on the new.
Yeah, we'll have a material board, we'll have, sections so that you can see how the detailing is gonna occur on the building. I mean, typical final package submission.
We really tried to get some of these renderings for this week, but just in working through all the pushing and pulling
We
and
understand.
whatnot, we just
It was better
didn't
to
get there.
wait.
We didn't want to show you half baked and
Well, I have one question, this is neither here nor there. Will the entrance corner actually there in the proposal, or is it still there?
This is still there because we still have to worry about our vision triangle coming off of that corner.
Yeah.
But we do have, we are gonna have some sort of utilities there. Like the transformer is probably gonna go in the corner, but I want to screen it better from it, but still keep the vision triangle. All of the other services from trash and all that are internal to the garage and will be rolled out onto the northern road there. So the goal is so that we can keep everything internal to it. The only thing that will be external is the transformer, and we will properly screen that.
My comment.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Other questions or? Anything else you guys want to float?
No, I think we're good at this time.
no, yeah, we
Thank you for your
appreciate your
time tonight.
feedback and your time.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Otherwise known, and that is 841, 843 South Front Street, 66 to 68 West Whittier, and 835 South Front. By yourself?
Charles Shane. He's carrying that conversation with Mike Shane.
Please introduce yourself. Name, time, role for the project.
Mo Dion, the Stonehenge Company, owner and developer of the project.
And my name is John Iman, and I'm with M&A Architects.
Please raise your right hand. You still tell the truth, the whole truth, and the truth.
I do.
Storback.
Okay, site is these buildings are located at the corner of South Front. In a section of the Brewery District known as the Southern Tier. The Brewery District plan states a large percentage of the Southern Tier's historic structures have been preserved, exhibiting outstanding examples of predominantly late 19th century architecture. The tier reflects the history and character of character of nearby Durham Village. Goals listed in the 1993 plan for the Southern Tier were to preserve and enhance the area as a residential, low intensity commercial mixed-use district, preserve the residential character of the area, and encourage adaptive reuse. Preliminary opinion stated by commissioners at the July 22nd business During this business meeting was that at least three of the four buildings proposed for demolition, we would be considered as contributing structures, which would be contributing to the historical and or architectural character of the historic district. The house at 835 South Front Street appears on the 1901 Sanborn map. The auditor's website is a construction date of 1876. They're not always correct. It appears to be an older house. The six-story industrial building at 66 to 68 West Whittier Street does not appear on 1901 Sanborn. However, various sources state a construction date from 1887 to 1897, certain 1917 for the warehouse at 841 to 843 South Front Street. And I would just add to that that we did conduct a special meeting site visit yesterday, in which Hunt, Mather, and teacher attended, and we toured the interior and exterior of buildings. We did go up into the tower of the six-story, but we were able to see interior and exterior of all the buildings. I wasn't able to get them uploaded, but I can send a bunch of photos to commissioners. So they site visit. That's it.
So do you have questions for Ms. Starbuck?
I do not have any questions. I think we've had a few conversations and we've been going back and forth on this. I think it's a thorough review, so I appreciate her input on the project.
Is speaker now? So it's, or shall we wait till after the conversation? Call Becky West to the speaker's meeting.
Should we move? Oh, okay.
It's safe.
Good afternoon.
Please introduce yourself.
I will. My name is Becky West, and I'm Executive Director of Columbus Landmarks. We are a nonprofit that advocates for historic preservation and design excellence. Columbus Landmarks objects to the proposal for this site and the demolition of the historic brick Italianate home at 835 South Front Street and the historic Jones Hill Warehouse Building at 841 South Front Street. These properties are architecturally and historically significant, and they contribute to the heritage of the Brewery District. Utilizing these buildings within a redevelopment plan has the potential to make the neighborhood more desirable and distinctive. Sacrificing these buildings and completely obscuring the manufacturing building would erode the neighborhood identity and be a major blow to the inventory of significant and dwindling historic buildings that remain in Columbus today. Columbus Landmarks recognizes the need for more housing and density in Columbus. We acknowledge that there are structural issues with these buildings, as is the case with most buildings this age. However, we are confident that this talented architecture team can work with their client to deliver a plan that balances an appropriate number of units with respect for the existing architecture and important history of this site. Please do not discount or ignore the status and stature of these buildings and their context. There is an opportunity for this project to be a standout in the same vein as other rehabilitated manufacturing buildings like Smith Brothers and the Julian. We urge the Commission to wait for a plan that respects this significant contributing architecture. If we can be supportive of the development team's efforts, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you.
Would you like to present any aspects of your proposal?
As an owner and developer, we fully support the thought process and what I just heard. And actually, the historic nature of these buildings was what was attractive to us, especially the tower. We basically had the property in contract since 2017, and we have been studying what is the best way and most practical way that we can do that, and also be absolutely not sensitive, but I personally, 34 years I've been in this business, our project has been very organic and try to preserve what we can do to the point that also meets the overall objective function of how a development and preservation for that matter can happen. And so it has taken us a long time working on it. We do share, we will reach out, definitely have dialogue and get input. All input is valuable to us, and we appreciate that. And our focus on this one definitely has been the tower building as the most significant component and the most practical component of this development to happen the right way and also maintain the historic nature of this site, what it was. And that will be as a part of our overall program as we go forward. So definitely we are at quite a preliminary stage of our journey, and but I don't think our objectives are totally different in an aggregate as what I just heard. And we appreciate the comments, and we will try to be very objective and practical within the realities of what it takes to get some of these projects done, and also preserve the buildings for the future, because at the present stage they are deteriorating, and they have been deteriorating, as you notice the house at 835, due to the lack of attention to it, what has happened to it, and with the condition that it is in. So we have three components, and our focus and have been, as much as we want to save, as much as we can, has been on the tower as the most prominent and significant component of this site. And it has been all buildings have been neglected for years. And however, I personally am very relatively emotional about the project, not in terms of getting a project done. At my stage of my career, I don't need another project, but this is a great opportunity to have our fingerprint on a corner that I think is significant for Central Ohio as a whole, you know. And we have done that in a number of locations, whether it's downtown Dublin or Northland area or other places we have done so. So we do share the objectives, and we definitely will reach out to get more input, and we will listen on our end, and will present the best practical approach as we see it to the project. So we thank you for your time and your comments.
Well, I think, this is obviously a little bit of a difficult conversation. I think all of us really want to preserve history. I mean, history is a lot about what architecture is all about. And we certainly understand the significance of certain structures. And I think as Mo has pointed out, what we're seeing as the significant structure in this particular case is the mid-rise tower building. And when you talk about the adaptive reuse side of things, that building in itself sets itself up primely for an adaptive reuse. It's a very solid building. It's very clean. It's been very well preserved. There are no structural issues in the building. Obviously, we would have to go through and renovate it, and new mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. Certainly in that building, we'd be looking at replacing all of the exterior windows. Along with all of that would come along with just the standard building code issues that we would have to upgrade that building to. So you get into thermal issues, and you get into life safety issues. We will be looking at adding a second stair in that building that currently doesn't exist today. So there is a lot of energy and a lot of effort and a lot of good intent put into that particular building because of its worthiness in terms of an adaptive reuse type project, which we all love. I mean, that's one of the greatest cherishes that you can have, is taking a building like that was something 120 years ago and adapt it to a current use today, and to, quite honestly, to a current demand. Mo's been talking with the city of Columbus on the economic side about some of the workforce housing components that are of high demand here in Columbus, and this project sets itself up in several ways, just not architecturally and from a design standpoint, but the affordability side of things comes into play, and that's a different conversation. But we certainly understand the issues with the warehouse building and the house in itself, and there is certainly an economic impact that we all take into account in terms of, the effort and cost of renovating a building. And in just about all cases, whether it's a historic building or not, there's a threshold, there's a break point where it makes sense or not. And I think along with that becomes, the conversation of significance. And certain buildings, and I'm just going to point out Belinda to, the State House as an example, has historic significance. It's not the same scale as this, But those are the type of buildings that you preserve, in perpetuity. In some of these projects, it's probably not quite that case. Some buildings I'll just say this kindly, they do have a lifetime. They do have a period. There is a point in time where the site has to become an adaptive reuse and not the building itself. And that's where we're at with this particular situation, because the site is the dominant site. It is worthy of a prestigious development of which Mo is trying to create here. And it is one to be noted, because that a new building at that site can change that site dramatically and for the better. And I understand the preservation side of things. And again, we all want to try to preserve, and that's the great thing about architecture is it is history, and it does document history. But again, I think from an adaptive side, we don't need and shouldn't just think of the building as being adaptive and reusable, but the site as well. And I think that's a big part of this conversation in terms of how we can put together a project that is good for the community and one that is representative in a way that really makes a mark within this area. And by a mark, I mean a positive statement of what this site can be. So that's generally how we feel and how we are looking at the project.
Yeah, and if I may add, we are looking at, if you look at the pie as being the square of 100 over there, we think that at the end of the day, we'll be preserving 70% of that. And in meeting our goal and objective, of course, as a developer, I cannot sit here and tell you that that's our primary objective. That's not our business. And we respectfully say, I'm transparent about, honest about that is what, but definitely in my veins and in my body runs the emotions of doing the right thing here. And I truly believe that that tower, in my opinion, is the most impactful, most significant. And if we can preserve the whole corner with the redevelopment and preserve 70% of the history of that corner with preserving the tower, we have achieved a lot, especially on a long-term basis, because lack of attention to the site and the buildings have caused that some of you, we appreciate the time you took and you toured the buildings, the house and all of that, and you saw the condition they were in. I think long-term, it will serve its purpose of achieving maybe 70% of the goals of the preservation objectives and Columbus Landmark or the city's historic preservation efforts are about. We can achieve that. Not necessarily 100%. Yes. On my end of it, because I believe when you look at the site, that corner, that tower has a 70% impact of historic notion, or brings to everybody's attention. Wow, that is how it caught my attention 6 years ago or 5 years ago, whenever it was, that I kind of pursued the property. That is what caught my attention. The warehouse didn't, and nor did the house north of that. Those didn't catch my attention because there are beautiful houses down that roadway also, whether they are law offices or residential or so forth. The tower was the one caught my attention when I was going to the sanctuary and the Audubon building. I was going there, and that is the first time I saw it, and that is what I felt like that is the most significant to preserve as much as possible. But I think that's 70% of the whole pie that we have here, and our attempt is towards that.
If I may also say one other thing. I've heard a couple references to some other projects here locally. The Bud Dairy building, I think it was the Jones, and there was another one that was referenced. And I think those are all good examples of what can be done. And I think when you take whatever vision you have of those other buildings that have been restored that way, I think that's what you can see in the tower building. Because as I mentioned earlier, the tower building has a very solid structure. It's a very clean building, and it is very set up and primed for redevelopment and renovation into, really, it could be a couple different uses, but residential is the most logical use. When you look at the warehouse building, it doesn't have that same appeal or adaptability or character or presence of the site as that tower building does. So we do feel that some of the references that have been made as comparable examples are fair and reasonable for the tower building, but I don't think they're fair and reasonable because they're not comparable. When you take a Bud Dairy versus the warehouse that we're looking at, they are not the same buildings at all. And so I think it's a little unfair to try to compare those apples to apples for what you could do with it when they're not even nearly the same type of building.
That being said,
Hmm?
we looked at schemes that would preserve some or most of the warehouse, at least along Front Street. And,
We've looked at a couple different studies where you dissect the building. You know, the part that you get, that gets really difficult, and I think down at Park Street is probably a good example of a situation where they're trying to reuse a part of the building. Because when you start taking a warehouse building like that apart, where the roof structure already doesn't meet the structural code requirements or loading requirements, you basically end up taking the entire roof structure off because your grid system of your existing columns and your structural system that is inadequate today isn't really worth saving. And that's part of the heartburn that we run into when you start looking at this, because you really do. And it's the proverbial can of worms. You know, I've done a lot of renovations. I did the old Chicago school over on Chicago Avenue, West Broad, a schoolhouse built in 1897. And we were fortunate that we were able to keep it and actually put it back, and we built it back as a school. So I'm very sensitive to those kind of things, but the degree of difficulty becomes very difficult and cost prohibitive. And then the other part of it is, if you do leave part of it, you know, the shell, let's say you left, 30, 40, 50 feet, on the two sides, there's not much of a building there to begin with. When you look at the elevation, especially on the South Front Street side, the gutter elevation is probably only about 10 feet. So you're preserving 10 feet of a bare brick wall for what purpose, of which you would then want to go in and make a whole lot of openings to make more windows, and get that street appeal that we're really trying to get after. So you end up dissecting a very small part of the building that you try to preserve. So that's where it's just the can of worms just gets to be so complicated that it's like, why are we doing this? So we have, and I appreciate that. And in some cases that can be done. I think in this case, it's very, very difficult. And if you just look at the way the thing's framed with that mezzanine structure, with the platforms that are in there, you'd literally have to gut the building and leave the wall standing.
Well, and if I may add, as you observed, the roof is structured over there from inside, how that was affected, and it completely has to come off. And our structural report also supports that. So basically, you're looking at on the front street side is basically a bare wall. And how do you incorporate that? When it is the floor level is about 4 or 5 feet, that becomes the challenge. 4 or 5 feet below street level, that becomes the challenging part.
Which one's that?
The prior application.
Oh, yeah, that's a different building though. I mean,
I don't think we can talk about specifics.
Okay.
About generic strategies for trying to get some character. So I mean, I don't think we can read things off.
Right.
Both.
mhm.
To your point, I think those facades are really. That image right there is how I think of that corner. It's really important to consider incorporating that, sure, and having an adaptive use strategy for that warehouse as a starting point.
I mean, bottom line, I do think of these as contributing structures to the neighborhood. I appreciate what you guys have done and what you're trying to do. I take issue with your characterization of the warehouse building is not interesting or not important. I get that it's not state house, but that doesn't to me mean as a preservationist and frankly as an architectural historian, that doesn't mean it's not useful, important, beautiful, and contributing. So I regret having to say that to you guys. I can tell you're trying to do a good thing. I agree with you. I'm thrilled to hear you're dealing with the tower. I want that same creativity to move to the other parts of the site.
It's obviously a tough site.
Yes.
It is, and part of what I struggle with, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The only point I want to make is, and you understand that we cannot, at this stage, deal with any economic hardship conversations. That's not part of our mandate at this stage. So And we're happy to hear those if you feel you need to talk about them, but we will not be
Yeah.
moving. based
No,
Understand?
we appreciate that, but we are here to hear the comments as such and ideas as such, and any of them to any practical way can be done. Then if we see, when we move to the practicality sense of, because at the end of the day, if the goal is the 70%, what will it take to preserve that? I'm just using that as an example. What will it take to preserve the 70%? And I know this is not a forum to discuss the practicality. Okay, who lives in that 70%? Where do they park and so forth? And so all those things are not function of this meeting today or whatever. I respect it and I appreciate that. What we are here also to hear comments from you and all of you about your vision and what you're seeing and the responsibilities that you're charged with as part of the whole big equation. And towards what, I'm sorry.
Contributing.
Very creative. Arts organization. To help. They have done amazing things in the past to help people. So I know that they would be.
There are two comments.
Yes.
And one comment, one question. The question being, that building, the warehouse building, it was built for a specific purpose, obviously. And it's a very inward building. And what we're trying to do is flip that around and make it more transparent and make it more live, because obviously we're trying to create a place where people do live. So in the thought of trying to preserve the facades of those buildings, that's ultimately not what we would want to see in terms of a livable environment, because there's not zero, but very little windows that could be of use to the internal user. So,
Those amazing skylights, have the interior courtyards, is light filled in many
yeah,
places.
but if we're trying to, yeah.
He's saying.
He's got he wants a country. He does this for a lot, right?
And honestly, as a commission, we do not add fenestration to the critical facades. Typically, those are what have to be left intact and actually restored, not altered. I do think you have an opportunity to do something similar to the High Street project and do a combination of keeping major pieces of that flat building and behind it, building something more to your liking. I would definitely, even if you get this commission to agree that it's not contributing and it could come down, I would be against any tall structure on that corner, because this is the residential section of Brewery District. It's not really the commercial. The only tall building in this whole area is the one that you're talking about.
This site is zoned for 60 foot.
Kitty corner from this, a number of condos were built and they're around 3.5 stories. So to me, even if you could remove this, I would not be happy about anything over 3.5 stories.
So how would you deal with the allowable zoning height that exists today?
Allowable is 35 feet.
No, this is zone 60.
This is
Mhm.
zone 60. It was zone 60, I thought, and then when they did control, I thought it was reduced to 35.
Your zoning map says 60, so.
We definitely have to be within the zoning guidelines I mean, whatever that might be, that can be, eventually we have to be within the zoning height and guidelines of what it would be. And it's not any of a material today on this stage. Well, that's right. And we are here to, right.
Sort of the one is contributing structure. Speak for everybody. There's some consensus on contributing structure at some level.
Right.
Maybe not complete, but
Yeah. Do we need to, we talked about that.
Yeah.
We need to talk.
yeah. So
Sure.
there-
Yeah, I have one more.
And then, so that's sort of conceptually, we have to get past contributing structures, and I think there's enough heft on the commission to say, we think it's contributing and the staff to cause, give you guys pause. And then the next question is, if we can get past that, what options are there? And I think what Bill's trying to say is, you think about the neighborhood and what we have allowed around there, we're talking about not a gigantically tall building. Plus, I would hate to obscure the view of the jewel in the crown, as you guys have carefully articulated it, by too tall a building that's gonna obscure that great tower. So just, God, just feedback.
Sure.
What you're thinking.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
one of the other struggles that we've been having, which is not an uncommon problem on other projects, is parking.
Yeah.
And so we were looking at this as an opportunity for a way to create parking that where we could be self-sufficient on our own site. And that's obviously a big part of any project.
One quick thought on that, and this is just a thought. So the linear street right of way to me is intriguing because it's not being used really for anything. So could that serve as some parking potentials?
We've talked to the city about that.
Okay.
And we talked about the city about still using that curb cut, and they said absolutely no. We've studied that garage, our sub-level parking for access on the west, the east, and the south side. The grade slope does provide some opportunity, but it's very difficult getting to that south side because of the condition of the alley in the back. And the alley in the back, for whatever, the right of way, again, you can see it right there. The western line of is it Bank Street there? It jogs right at the corner of our property. So it goes from a normal right of way width to half of a normal. And that's also causing us some problems on our site circulation.
So you've talked about trying to get some parallel parking or something on that.
There's space to do it, for sure, but it's not technically, legally, it is the
There's-
city's right of way.
There is not enough even to serve the tower. They are not even to serve any residents. Yeah, exactly. Right. Right.
We would love to, and we've done plans showing how we can park on it and, what we could utilize it for. So far, the city has, because we did go through the preliminary site compliance process, so we got all the comments from the engineering and so on and so forth, so we have gone to that level.
The parking is your biggest challenge.
Every
And
project.
that is really hitting us hard in terms of, and not that we are favorable to an underground parking garage, which is not inexpensive. Now, I'll put my greedy developer hat on now. So and it is not so. We try to avoid that, but to be completely transparent, we cannot have a huge impact on the street. I mean, and people parking on that and so forth. There's no room for it. So somehow that parking is a requirement of the complete redevelopment of the site. It has to happen. And that is tying our hands a little bit on what we do here and where we go here. I mean, we are seeking solutions ourselves. And that is why I kind of welcome some of the comments about how we do this the right way. We have worked on it for almost 5 years now.
As far as a minimum 1-to-1, ideally, 1.25.
And that needs a variance for that, don't you? That even needs a variance based on city codes, city's requirements.
Suzie just proved that one-on-one seems to be the magic formula. Residential right now. Yes.
Unless you have the ability to share, and here we don't. Like a mixed use, office and residential.
But
Yeah.
it depends on where you are and the size. I mean, we just finished up another project at 1.5 and we are tight. Right.
I do think large structure attached seem to be.
Small.
Yeah. Concrete blocks. I'm talking about the brick one on the side facing
That
front.
one, right.
That one.
Yeah, the thing about the parking is, whatever you do with the project, even if you didn't do anything with the warehouse and left it as is and did the residential in the back, we still have a parking problem. So,
Oh, yeah.
The 1-to-1 is your starting point.
starting point. Yeah.
And personally, I think that's probably a good start. I think that there is on-street parking around here, so it seems to not be totally used.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean, I do enough of these high-density urban infill type projects where once you start saying that, then the residents start to really, you know, raise their hand and say, hey, wait a minute. And so we really, as a goal, try to get to a very reasonable parking solution.
The parking may guide how many units you think you could.
It sometimes does. Mhm.
But I agree with Cynthia that this is a definitely
Right.
contributing. 3 buildings are contributing in my mind. Which means you have to find creative ways to deal with it.
Right, we appreciate, as John was saying about the windows and lack of an inward versus up modifying. Look at this view as driving down south on Front Street and what you're looking at the warehouse walls on no penetration at all. I mean, it is, you look at they're like that.
The big windows are physically.
No.
It is not. No, look at this, right? Look at this view.
Yeah.
Look at that facade. I mean, this is basically,
Yeah, the primary 2 facades on the corner are typically what we really don't allow any major new openings. But
Consider.
say on the north, or on certainly with the side you can't see it, that's a different story.
Understand. So I'm gonna maybe try to tie a few strings together with a few comments. We've had a little discussion about trying to preserve part of the building, you know, like the 2 sides that you're referring to. We've had a little bit of conversation about the facades, preserving the facades of those same 2 sides. If we're able to find a creative way to preserve, whether it's the structure or the facade or some combination of both. 90%? Yeah. How would you feel with the height in that scenario if we're able to get to a point where you're comfortable with the preservation side of things and also understanding that our site is zoned for 60 feet?
I felt this way when we were talking on site. I mean, I think you want to showcase that building. I get that you need the density, so we're trying to work with you.
sure.
But I'm with Bill on that. I would not want to see this.
I think for me, it depends on.
I'm not quite so nice.
Touche, thank you. Now you're challenging us. Right. Right.
To your point, I think
Now, also give and take between.
Northwest?
Yeah.
As you're getting with the.
Well,
northwest, basically back behind the house,
Mhm.
looking in this view where that tree is.
Mhm.
I think that's pretty nice.
And we also see concrete block garage. Yeah, I'm okay 86 in the concrete block garage as well as the brick garage.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
You get rid of the concrete block garage as well as the brick.
The concrete block behind the building?
You would keep it. What year is the brick garage?
I would assume it to be the
Was
same.
it always a garage?
To me, it's more related to warehouse.
It's the same brick as the warehouse.
Yeah.
It's not really, so. But it's gonna depend on the overall.
I would get rid of it to save the warehouse.
Get rid of the house.
There.
well, I mean,
Give and take.
well, we are not, I mean, let's just, if I may suggest to discuss a little bit about the house. And as you saw it yourself, I don't know how to salvage that. I really don't. I mean, people walked it and your commission members walked it and they can comment about it. I really don't know how to salvage that house. That has deteriorated so bad in such a condition. And when we are looking at it, we're looking at the salvaging and preserving the whole site and the buildings on the site. but definitely you have seen a detailed report from an structural, very reputable structural engineer. I mean, and some of you that joined us yesterday walked it. I don't dare to walk it too much myself. I haven't, but because it's been neglected. Pardon me? No, I haven't owned it for 4 years. I had it in contract since 2017. I just took ownership of it about 5 months ago, closed on it. I had it in contract in 2017. Phil Schill from Schill Scenic owned it. And I had it in contract and I was trying to work with him. We finally closed on it. I believe it was November of 2019 or 20. He stayed there. He didn't hand the keys over to us till early part of this year. So I have not, I boarded it up because people were breaking in and living there, and we got notices from City of Columbus for people getting there, and it was not conducive for anybody going in there, especially, I mean, and some of you walked in there. I would like to hear from, I mean, anything can be done, of course. And I mean, somebody can.
Examples in German Village right across the street that are just as bad as that.
Yeah. Right.
Crazy engineer those aspects. So it's doable.
I think it also has an important function to transition street from the bigger part of your project down to the street level.
Exactly.
And, you know, I think that helps your project. That's why we talked a lot about transitioning back to General Village in the last meeting. That house does that for you. So I think there's more to it than just whether or not it can be safe.
That's true, and it also provides a buffer, because right now you have right through the house, so the owner of the great house next door is here. She would have traffic. So. By the screen.
Yeah.
And you can use it as like a tenant office.
Right.
But I would still trade it.
Well, that's a challenge of the architects.
You saw them, I mean, they kept the front facade and went 80 feet up. They were up to 78, 79 feet on that back facade. Yeah, but that's, I mean,
It's on the northern tier.
Right.
Which I consider definitely a taller, more urban.
Right.
Situation.
Yes, it officially is defined as that, and this is defined as one residential.
Mhm.
So even though, yes, it is 6-foot high, that doesn't mean that the commission has to allow this.
the zoning is 60 foot, right?
I agree that your 6 or 7 store, whatever you call that jewel, is the crown jewel for you.
For all of us.
It's an interesting challenge to make it all work.
Well, definitely we are trying to make take a balanced approach. And at the end of the day, the definition of preservation is whether it is instantaneous for today or whether it is for a longer period of time. And I'm not in that business, so I have to watch my comments out of line because I don't know that what that is. But at the same time, we are looking at the whole picture of it and whether how this project can happen in order to preserve the crown jewel. And if we get input and feedback, whether it's from Columbus Landmark or from you and so forth, in such a way that the collective objectives can be met, then we have achieved something collectively as a team. If we cannot do that, then I think the options will go a different direction and do something else as a vested person with a vested interest in the property, in the land, and all of that. The program that we have developed, there's been many, many discussions and meetings with John's office and his staff on what's the best way to go about this and what's feasible to go about this and what can happen along with the City of Columbus's requirements. I mean, I think first we were looking at the entrance at the southern part of this entrance into the parking garage. Pardon me?
It does.
But they are not allowing us to do that. So that creates a very
You indicated Bank Street throws down in right of way. Who owns the west side of that?
The property, the property to the north, the development to the north. For whatever
You
reason.
buy some right of way from them, be able to make Bank Street a more major entry into your residential. Just throwing it out.
Understand? We've had those conversations.
Ultimately, we just telling you guys are trying to do the right thing. Excuse me, gentlemen. Ultimately, we can tell you guys are trying to do the right thing. And we appreciate that you're creative, astute business people. We're going to really work on trying to come up with a new plan.
you have our commitment that we will do our best. That commitment is necessarily mean that we can deliver. That will be, you will be 100% satisfied and happy with it. But again, we'll keep our eye on the ball with the crown jewel as being our major accomplishment if we get to develop the project. No, absolutely. Anything else?
You guys would like to ask us, or anything else anyone would like to say?
Okay.
No, for us, in case we approach just a kind of a procedural question and so forth. If we basically look at it, analyze it, and come up with the best creative way that we can. However, we know that that's not going to be, except by based on what we have heard, some of the things, we know that you're not going to have smiles on your faces, maybe. But but we know that from a economic viability, practicality, that's the only way. What are the next steps for us to do so? Do we need to get a kind of a come here with asking for an official no from you before we go that route, or what's the best way or procedurally that Connie we need to do this, if I may?
Responding to their comments now. Have a meeting with Mike and we know what the guidelines are, we know what the code is, and we can kind of basically say what we think the commissioner's viewpoint might be. Not always 100% agreement, but we can kind of, working with us first is really, I think, the best step. And then and we might be able to tell you, we think there's no way the commission's going to approve that. But you can also just, you can also come back to the next meeting if you want to. But I would say, create new renderings first, kind of responding to these comments, and then send them to us. We can meet, or we can.
Lonnie, what he's asking is, does he have to get refused by the commission to go back to the economic viability question?
Yes.
He does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to understand, because if you're looking, no, right. I just didn't know. If my first time in front of you, I wanted to understand your procedural steps, and we love to get to a point that we get your approval. I mean, we are not shying away, but I just wanted to understand where we are heading, we are not necessarily in an absolute hurry either. But as far as knowing the steps and as far as planning it, if we need that, then I just didn't want to be out in a vacuum over there and at what we are doing. We are going to do our best, but how good of a design, how creative of it to be, it has to meet some economic thresholds in order for it to happen and to achieve that. And
With an explanation. situation was and why you maybe didn't elect to go that way will matter to us.
We appreciate that. That is good to hear. And you have my personal commitment that we will do our best. And sitting here, I'm not in any way make a commitment that we are going to hit the target in the next attempt, but you will definitely see something else from us before.
The difference is I think you spark some thoughts on your side, we might be open. So.
This kind of a project, there are at least 2 conceptuals before you get to any kind of
Sure,
vote.
sure.
It's so large.
Challenging.
Understand that.
Definitely.
Rightfully so, rightfully so. And it's for challenging for us also. I mean, for us, and you look at my portfolio, I've not touched anything but challenging projects. But I mean, that is what drives our kind of a philosophy and what we do. We want to have, I mean, something that is noticed, whether it was Bridge and High, the first development in downtown Dublin, or Creekside in Gahanna, or Northland Mall redevelopment. That is what has been our portfolio, or the red building across from Capital Law School. We'll see. We'll see what we can come up with. We appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Focus more toward enough money on a project, so that's
So the criteria and what you have to submit.
it would be very high.
Is steered in a different direction.
Especially since I think you closed on this sometime in, maybe 2 years ago.
2019, we purchased it. Yeah.
So you purchased it. It's not like you've.
Not all, not
a
had.
generation and are dealing with.
Right. We did not have control of it till early this year, but we closed on it then, and so forth. And I appreciate your comments. Thank you. We get that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
So, I mean, we had, elections, yeah, new business. Did we want to deal with elections or you want to put that off till later?
And if you want to, I mean, Jeff has expressed an interest in serving as the chairperson, and I think the commission as a whole has expressed that same interest.
The normal progression is vice chair. You don't have to follow it, but
So the nomination could be
he
the
seems
nomination.
most interested.
We could mute Jeff because he's not here.
Well, I talked to him personally and I said, I'm not going to nominate you.
I
I
didn't
really
do it.
don't want it.
So do we want to try to do it today?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Do you run that part or do I? Okay, so we'll open for nominations for the role of chair and vice chair. Are there any thoughts?
I would like to nominate Jeffrey Punjo as
Oh.
chair.
Good, then he can.
I will second that. What about vice chair? Speak up.
Not me, don't look at me.
Oh, I thought you were gonna know.
I can nominate you.
That's what I thought.
I would like to nominate the current
Calls me, says.
temporary chair.
Second on it?
And don't we have a treasurer?
No, we don't anymore. It's not coming. Is anybody else going to be this? Okay,
Do you guys?
are nominations closed? Make a motion? All in favor? Or
Aye.
didn't do a motion.
Oh.
first. I'm sorry. Screwed it up. Let's
I
make a
move
motion.
to approve the nomination.
Okay,
I second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Close? All right. So done.
So let Daniel call Jeff.
Just, no, just.
And for anything.
Good choice.
Now we have.
Yeah. Any new business? Okay. All right. I'll take, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Okay,
So moved.
Second.
all in favor? Opposed, same sign. We are done.
Thank you for proceeding.
It is a little overwhelming, the first one.
Question of the cost. Wait. That was when you recorded. So funny, I was thinking when they're talking about parking, work for quota, so I always
Yeah.
want to again that there is this part for the service, maybe they can be